Welcome to the one place where human logic completely collapses, the neighborhood. Here, a leaf, a shadow, or a squirrel can spark full-blown warfare. In this video, you'll hear 69 complaints so absurd they make reality feel like it's glitching. If you thought your neighbors were weird, trust me, after this, they'll look like monks. 1. A woman in Australia actually took her neighbors to the Supreme Court because they were barbecuing in their own backyard. She claimed the smell of grilled fish and steak was destroying her quality of life and demanded they be banned from cooking outside. When the court dismissed the case because, people have to eat, thousands of strangers organized a massive BBQ event right outside her house on Facebook. It turns out you cannot legally sue someone just because you do not like the smell of sausages. 2. One resident called the police on her neighbor because his large oak tree was stealing her sunshine. She wasn't talking about solar panels or growing crops. She just wanted to tan on her patio at exactly 2 in the afternoon, and the tree was casting a shadow. When the dispatch officer explained that they could not arrest a tree for obeying the laws of physics or existing, she demanded they send a squad car to force the neighbor to chop it down immediately. Spoiler alert, the tree is still there. 3. Next door is an absolute goldmine for paranoia, but this one takes the cake. A guy posted a frantic alert about a suspicious character wandering around a property with a machete. The police arrived with lights flashing, ready for a takedown, only to find the homeowner doing some light landscaping with a pair of hedge clippers. The machete was just a gardening tool, and the intruder had lived there for 10 years. The complainer defended himself by saying the man simply did not look like someone who appreciated hydrangeas. 4. Living in an apartment means hearing neighbors, but this is next level. A tenant filed a formal noise complaint against the unit above him because their goldfish was being too loud. You heard that right. He claimed the electronic hum of the tank filter was vibrating through the ceiling and causing him migraines. The landlord went to check it out and found a tiny beta fishbowl with absolutely no filter at all. It turns out the vibrating noise was coming from the complainer's own refrigerator. 5. An HOA in a wealthy gated community sent a violation notice to a resident for parking a dilapidated vehicle in his own driveway. The car in question was a brand new $60,000 pickup truck. The board members decided that trucks were working-class vehicles that lowered the aesthetic value of the neighborhood. They demanded he park it in the garage or trade it for a luxury sedan. He responded by parking a rusted tractor on his lawn, which, thanks to a loophole in the bylaws, was technically allowed as decorative landscaping. 6. One tech-phobic neighbor demanded everyone on the block turn off their Wi-Fi routers at night because the waves were giving her insomnia and making her cat act weird. She even wrapped her own house in tinfoil, literally inside the walls, and tried to bill her neighbors for the cost. When they refused to disconnect from the modern world, she threatened to sue the internet service provider for assaulting her aura with invisible data beams. 7. A woman in Utah called 911 because her neighbor put up a classic Greek statue in his garden. She claimed it was pornography and that her children were being scarred for life by the sight of a stone butt. The police officer had to explain that the statue of David is art, not a sex crime. To make matters worse, she tried to sneak over at night to put a pair of gym shorts on the statue, but she tripped the motion sensor lights and got caught red-handed. 8. A downstairs neighbor left a passive-aggressive note saying, "Please stop bowling in your apartment at 3 in the morning." The problem was that the upstairs neighbor was a 90-pound nurse who worked night shifts and wasn't even home at that time. When she confronted him, he admitted he just assumed she was home and wanted to preemptively complain about future noise. He was basically hearing phantom footsteps and blaming a ghost, but he still demanded she buy thicker rugs for the apartment she wasn't occupying. 9. It is usually nice to feed birds, but one guy took it too far according to the lady next door. She complained to the city council that he was training an army of squirrels to attack her property. Apparently, he was tossing peanuts specifically toward the fence line, and the squirrels were burying the shells in her flower pots. She presented a bag of peanut shells as evidence, claiming it was biological warfare. The city actually fined him for harboring rodents, which is a fancy way of saying he was the Squirrel King. 10. An angry man filed a complaint with his homeowners association because his neighbor's house color was aggressive. The house was painted a standard beige, almost identical to every other house on the street. However, the complainer insisted that in the late afternoon sun, the beige looked slightly too yellow, which clashed with his lawn ornaments. He demanded the neighbor repaint the entire house a cooler shade of sand to restore the visual harmony of the street. The board actually voted on it, proving that democracy doesn't always work. 11. A family in a subdivision received a formal warning letter from their homeowners association for unauthorized artistic expression. Their crime? Their 5-year-old daughter had drawn a rainbow and a few flowers on their own driveway using washable sidewalk chalk. The letter claimed it looked like graffiti and lowered property values. Did they really expect the property market to crash because of a toddler's doodle? The dad responded by power washing the driveway, but he accidentally on purpose missed a spot shaped exactly like a giant middle finger. 12. You expect neighbors to complain about loud parties, but what about happiness? A woman in London filed a noise complaint against the couple next door because they were laughing too joyously during a dinner party. She literally told the council that their laughter was intrusive and mocked her solitude. The council had to send an officer to measure the decibel level of their joy. If laughing is illegal now, are we all just supposed to sit in silence and stare at the wall? 13. A man in Florida called the cops on his neighbor for stealing his air. He claimed that the neighbor's new, slightly larger air conditioning unit was sucking up all the oxygen in the immediate vicinity, leaving him breathless on his porch. He wasn't talking about fumes or exhaust. He genuinely believed the machine was a vacuum for the atmosphere. The police advised him to maybe just go inside or, take a biology class. 14. One resident got a violation notice because his grass was too green. You would think a lush lawn is the goal, right? Well, the neighbor next door hadn't watered his lawn in months, so it was completely dead and brown. He complained that the contrast between the two lawns made his house look abandoned and demanded the green grass owner stop watering until both lawns looked equally terrible. Imagine being so petty that you want everyone else to fail just so you don't look bad. 15. A woman called animal control because she was convinced her neighbor's cat was stalking her from the window. She claimed that every time she went into her backyard, the cat would sit in the second-story window and stare at her with malicious intent. She demanded the owners put blinds up or move the cat to a different room. Seriously, who calls the authorities because a house cat is looking at them? It's a cat. Judging people is literally their full-time job. 16. In a bizarre twist of logic, a man complained to the city that his neighbor's solar panels were draining the sun and preventing his tomato plants from getting enough energy. He argued that the panels were sucking up all the photons before they could reach his garden, which is definitely not how light works. He even brought a basket of small, sad tomatoes to a town hall meeting as evidence of the theft. 17. A guy in a condo complex filed a complaint because his neighbor walked too heavily. That sounds somewhat reasonable until you find out the neighbor was a paraplegic man in a wheelchair. The complainer said the sound of the rubber tires rolling across the hardwood floor was aggressive and sounded like a bowling alley. When the management pointed out that the man couldn't exactly float, the complainer suggested he install plush carpeting everywhere to muffle the wheels. 18. Some people just hate nature. A homeowner demanded his neighbor cut down a beautiful magnolia tree because the falling petals were littering his driveway. He didn't just want it trimmed, he wanted it gone because he had to use a leaf blower twice a year. When the neighbor refused, the complainer started throwing the petals back over the fence, one handful at a time, screaming, "Return to sender." Is a little bit of pink confetti really worth high blood pressure? 19. A resident in a strict HOA community was fined because his trash can lid was not fully closed on garbage day. It was propped open about 2 inches because of a large pizza box. The neighbor who reported him took a photo with a ruler to prove the violation. A ruler. Imagine walking around your neighborhood with a measuring tape just hoping to catch someone slipping up on their trash hygiene. 20. A woman complained that her neighbor's new fence was offensive. It wasn't painted a weird color or covered in graffiti. It was a standard wooden fence. Her issue was that the ugly side, the side with the horizontal support beams, was facing her yard. She claimed it was a visual assault and demanded he flip the entire fence around. While it is polite to put the nice side out, calling the police over wooden beams is a special kind of crazy. 21. One neighbor accused a man of operating a commercial business in a residential zone. The evidence? He received too many Amazon packages. The accuser tracked the delivery trucks and logged every single box that arrived, convinced he was running a warehouse out of his garage. It turned out the guy just had a shopping addiction and really liked ordering bulk toilet paper. Since when is online shopping a zoning violation? 22. A very confused elderly lady called the police to report that her neighbors were cooking meth because she saw steam coming out of their windows in the middle of winter. The SWAT team didn't kick down the door, but they did investigate. It turned out the couple was just boiling a massive pot of pasta water and had opened the window to let the heat out. The chemical smell she reported was actually just garlic bread. 23. A man filed a noise complaint because his neighbor was watering the lawn too aggressively. He claimed the sound of the sprinkler rotating made him feel surrounded by artillery fire and ruined his morning yoga. When the officer arrived, he found a normal sprinkler gently misting the grass. The complainer insisted the neighbor switch to silent watering, whatever that means, or only hydrate the lawn when he wasn't home. 24. You know you have reached peak pettiness when you complain about the mailman. A neighbor filed a grievance because the carrier would walk across his lawn to deliver mail to the house next door. He didn't sue the post office. He sued the neighbor for inducing trespassing by receiving letters. He actually wanted the neighbor to move their mailbox to the curb so the mailman wouldn't have to step on his precious grass. 25. A woman demanded that her neighbor stop parking his car in his own driveway because the reflection of the sun off his windshield was blinding her while she watched TV in her living room. She insisted he buy a car cover or park down the street. Instead of just closing her curtains like a normal human being, she wanted to dictate where he could park his vehicle on his own property. Do these people hear themselves when they speak? 26. A suburban dad decided to build a treehouse for his kids in the backyard. It was a masterpiece, fully sturdy and safe. However, the woman next door filed a formal complaint stating that the treehouse violated her privacy because the children might look down into her yard while she was sunbathing. The kicker? She had an 8-foot privacy fence and the treehouse had no windows facing her property. She was essentially worried about X-ray vision. 27. A neighbor tried to get a backyard trampoline banned because she believed the bouncing children were creating seismic activity that endangered her home's foundation. She even brought a homemade chart of earthquake readings, which turned out to just be crayon scribbles of wavy lines. The city inspector explained that kids jumping in a yard cannot trigger tectonic movement, but she still demanded the trampoline owners buy earthquake insurance. 28. One tech-savvy prankster changed his Wi-Fi network name to FBI Surveillance Van Number 2. His paranoid neighbor saw it pop up on his phone and immediately called the local police station to demand why he was being investigated. The police had to explain that they do not broadcast their undercover operations via Wi-Fi signals. The neighbor still demanded the van be removed from the street, even though there was no van. 29. A woman called the cops on a group of teenagers playing basketball in their own driveway at 4 in the afternoon. She wasn't complaining about shouting or music. She specifically hated the rhythmic thumping of the ball hitting the pavement. She told the dispatcher it sounded like a heartbeat and was giving her anxiety. The officer arrived, watched the kids make a few three-pointers, and told the lady to maybe close her window. 30. Wind chimes are supposed to be relaxing, right? Not for one guy who sued his neighbor for sonic harassment. He claimed the gentle tinkling sound of the chimes was causing him psychological distress and preventing him from concentrating on his work. He even recorded audio of the chimes during a light breeze and played it in court as evidence of torture. The judge was not impressed, and the chimes stayed up. 31. A resident in a crowded neighborhood put orange traffic cones in the public street in front of his house to save his parking spot. When a neighbor moved the cones to park there, because it is a public road, the cone owner called the police to report a theft. He wasn't reporting the theft of the spot. He wanted the neighbor arrested for stealing his plastic cones. Imagine thinking you own a piece of asphalt just because you put a toy on it. 32. An elderly man was out gardening on a hot summer day without a shirt on. His neighbor, who apparently had very delicate sensibilities, filed a complaint for indecent exposure. She claimed seeing his saggy skin was offensive to the community and harmful to children. The police had to gently explain that being old and shirtless on your own property is not a crime, no matter how much she wished it was. 33. A family installed one of those cute little free libraries at the end of their driveway to encourage reading. The neighbor across the street filed a petition to have it removed, claiming it would attract vagrants and drifters to the neighborhood. By vagrants, she meant the neighborhood children who wanted to borrow a Harry Potter book. Apparently, literacy is a gateway to crime in her mind. 34. You have heard of light pollution, but this is ridiculous. A man complained that the blue light from his neighbor's massive flat-screen TV was shining through his window and disrupting his circadian rhythm. Instead of buying blackout curtains or just closing his blinds, he demanded the neighbor stop watching television after sunset. He actually suggested they switch to reading books by candlelight to preserve the darkness of the night. 35. A woman built a snowman in her front yard with her kids. The neighbor called the homeowners association because the snowman was facing her house. She claimed the snowman's coal eyes were staring at her aggressively, and it felt like a threat. She demanded they rotate the snowman 180 degrees so it would stare at the street instead. It is hard to believe, but she felt intimidated by frozen water. 36. People get possessive about their trash cans. One guy set up a hidden camera because he suspected his neighbor was putting small items like candy wrappers or soda cans into his bin. When he caught the neighbor dropping a single coffee cup into his half-empty bin on trash day, he printed out the photo and posted it on telephone poles around the neighborhood with the caption, "Trash Thief." Is saving 4 inches of space in a garbage can really worth a neighborhood war? 37. A homeowner received a violation notice because he hung his garden hose in a non-aesthetic loop. The HOA claimed the curve of the hose created an eyesore that disrupted visual harmony on the block. They demanded he rehang it in a perfect figure 8 or purchase an approved hose retraction device. He responded by arranging the hose into a giant smiley face on the side of his house, which technically met none of their measurable criteria. 38. A woman called animal control because her neighbor's dog was mentally harassing her dog. The neighbor's dog wasn't barking or growling. It was just sitting by the fence, silently staring. The woman claimed this was a form of psychological dominance that was giving her poodle a complex. She wanted the silent dog required to wear a blinder or be kept indoors. Since when do dogs need a restraining order for looking? 39. A man in a townhouse complex complained that his neighbor flushed the toilet too aggressively at night. He claimed the sound of the rushing water in the pipes was waking him up and that the neighbor should adhere to a no flush after 10 p.m. rule. He seriously suggested leaving it to mellow until morning to preserve the silence. I don't know about you, but I would rather hear a swoosh than deal with the alternative. 40. One neighbor was furious that the family next door was growing wildflowers in their front garden instead of manicured turf grass. He called the city to report a noxious weed infestation. When the city inspector arrived, he found a beautiful, deliberate pollinator garden full of butterflies and bees. The complainer argued that anything not green and cut to 2 inches was a weed. He was basically the Grinch of gardening. 41. Flowers are usually a source of joy, but not for one homeowner in a gated community. She filed a formal grievance against her neighbor for planting red tulips. Her reasoning? Her own house was painted a soft salmon pink, and she claimed the bright red flowers clashed violently with her exterior paint job, causing an eyesore that lowered her property value. She actually demanded the neighbor dig them up and replace them with white lilies to better accent her siding. 42. You might think the sky is free for everyone, but one man disagreed. He threatened legal action against his neighbor because birds flying to the neighbor's bird feeder were pooping on his car while in transit. He claimed the neighbor was liable for the airspace violation and the subsequent biological waste dropped from above. He literally wanted the neighbor to control the flight paths of wild sparrows. How exactly do you issue a traffic citation to a pigeon? 43. Hanging laundry outside is an eco-friendly way to dry clothes, yet it triggered a neighborhood war in one suburb. A woman complained to the city council that her neighbor's underwear hanging on the line was lewd and lascivious. She argued that seeing a pair of granny panties flapping in the breeze was practically pornography and corrupted the neighborhood children. The city inspector had to explain that drying clean laundry is not a sex crime. 44. Precision is important to some people, but this is bordering on obsession. A man received a nasty letter from his neighbor regarding his lawn mowing habits. The complaint wasn't that the grass was too long, it was that the man mowed in diagonal stripes. The neighbor, who mowed exclusively in vertical lines, claimed the clashing geometric patterns created visual chaos that disturbed his peace of mind. He demanded they coordinate their mowing schedules and patterns to create a unified lawn front. 45. Technology often confuses the older generation, leading to some hilarious misunderstandings. A frantic homeowner called the police to report a gang of digital criminals loitering on the sidewalk. It turned out to be a group of neighborhood kids playing Pokemon Go on their phones. They were standing perfectly still, trying to catch a virtual Charizard, but the caller was convinced they were hacking into his Wi-Fi to steal his identity. 46. A vegan resident in an apartment complex tried to get her neighbor evicted for cooking bacon with the windows open. She claimed the smell was a hazardous pollutant that was coating her furniture in grease particles and assaulting her ethical beliefs. She even sent him a bill for professional upholstery cleaning. While nobody likes a smelly apartment, you cannot evict someone just because their breakfast choice offends your nose. 47. Driving a unique car is a personal choice, but one HOA board didn't see it that way. They fined a resident for parking a vintage hearse in his driveway. The man was a collector of classic cars, but the neighbors claimed the vehicle brought bad juju and was an omen of death that made them uncomfortable. They argued it wasn't a passenger vehicle but a commercial vessel for the deceased. Can a car actually curse a neighborhood? 48. Fall is a beautiful season until the leaves start dropping. One particularly unreasonable man demanded his neighbor vacuum his tree. Yes, vacuum the branches, before the leaves could fall off. He was tired of the leaves blowing into his pristine yard and argued that preemptive removal was the only solution. When the neighbor laughed off the request, the man threatened to sue him for negligent landscaping. 49. Privacy works both ways, or at least it should. A woman filed a police report for indecent exposure after seeing her neighbor walking around naked in his own living room. The catch? She had to use high-powered binoculars to see through his window from across the street. The police officer informed her that if she has to use spy equipment to be offended, the problem is probably her, not the naked guy eating cereal. 50. Garden gnomes are either cute or tacky, depending on who you ask, but one neighbor found them terrifying. He submitted a complaint claiming the gnome in the yard next door had an evil expression that was giving him nightmares. He insisted the gnome be turned around to face the wall or removed entirely because it felt like he was being watched by a cursed object. It was a piece of painted ceramic, not a haunted doll from a horror movie. 51. Fear of radiation drives people to do strange things. A couple demanded their neighbor remove an invisible dog fence because they believed the underground wire was emitting dangerous frequencies that caused their headaches. The system runs on a low-voltage radio signal, similar to a garage door opener, but they were convinced it was frying their brains. They even planted metal rods along the property line to ground the imaginary electricity. 52. Sometimes eavesdropping leads to embarrassing mistakes. A woman called the non-emergency line to report that her neighbor was talking to invisible people and might be having a psychotic break in the garden. The police arrived to do a welfare check, only to find the neighbor wearing a small Bluetooth headset, happily chatting with her mother while pruning roses. The caller just hadn't seen the earpiece and assumed insanity. 53. A man claimed ownership of a specific parking spot on a public street because he had been parking there for 20 years. When a new neighbor moved in and parked there legally, the man smeared peanut butter all over the newcomer's windshield. He left a note saying, "Respect the hierarchy." Imagine being a grown adult using sandwich spreads as a weapon in a turf war over public asphalt. 54. Decorations usually brighten up a home, but glow-in-the-dark stars were the final straw for one resident. He complained that the plastic stars on his neighbor's bedroom ceiling were visible through the window at night and ruined his view of the natural night sky. He demanded the neighbor scrape them off or keep the blackout curtains drawn 24/7. He was literally jealous of plastic astronomy. 55. A woman accused her neighbor of theft because she believed he had stolen her Wi-Fi signal strength. Her internet was slow one morning, so she assumed he had siphoned her bandwidth through the wall. She called the police demanding they retrieve her missing gigabytes and arrest the neighbor for digital burglary. The officer had to explain that weak Wi-Fi is not a criminal matter and that her router was unplugged. 56. Early morning joggers can be annoying, but this reaction was excessive. A homeowner sued a runner who passed his house every morning at 6 a.m. because the runner was breathing too heavily. The homeowner claimed the sound of the panting was penetrating his double-paned windows and causing him emotional distress before his morning coffee. He demanded the runner hold his breath while passing the property or choose a different route. 57. Holiday spirit went off the rails when one neighbor accused another of using Christmas lights to send secret messages. The blinking pattern on the roof was just a standard factory setting, but the paranoid neighbor was convinced it was Morse code signaling drug dealers or alien overlords. He spent nights recording the flashes and trying to decode the gibberish, eventually presenting a notebook full of nonsense to the police as proof of a conspiracy. 58. Precision landscaping is one thing, but this was surgical warfare. A man discovered that his neighbor's rose bush extended exactly 2 inches over the property line. Instead of asking him to trim it, he took a pair of shears and cut every single flower exactly in half, right down the middle, leaving a bizarre cross-section of petals facing the street. Is destroying nature really the best way to prove you own 2 inches of dirt? 59. A woman filed a formal complaint with the city because her neighbor was baking too often. She wasn't selling the goods, she just liked making cookies for her grandkids. The complainer argued that the constant smell of vanilla and sugar was wafting into her home and making her gain weight through secondhand calorie inhalation. She genuinely believed she was getting fat just by smelling snickerdoodles from across the fence. 60. Superstitions can ruin relationships. A family painted their front door a bright, cheerful red to boost their curb appeal. The woman next door immediately demanded they repaint it because, according to her specific interpretation of feng shui, a red door facing north attracted bad energy that would spill over into her life. She claimed her sudden string of bad luck, like stubbing her toe, was directly caused by their paint choice. 61. One resident was absolutely furious that his neighbor had a parrot. The bird wasn't screaming or making noise at night. The problem was that the parrot had learned to imitate the sound of a ringing telephone. The complainer kept running to answer his landline, only to realize it was the bird next door pranking him. Instead of getting caller ID, he tried to get the bird evicted for wire fraud and impersonating a telecommunications device. 62. You can't control the weather, but don't tell that to this guy. He threatened to sue his neighbor because the wind blew leaves from the neighbor's tree into his pool. He argued that the neighbor was responsible for every single leaf and should install a giant net around the entire canopy to catch the falling debris. When the judge dismissed the idea, the man started mailing the wet leaves back to the neighbor in envelopes. 63. A man called the police to report that his neighbor was summoning dark forces in the backyard. The evidence? The neighbor was burning sage and playing a wind instrument. The caller insisted it was a cult ritual and demanded an exorcist be sent immediately. The officers arrived to find the neighbor peacefully practicing for a meditation class. The complainer still argued the sounds were spiritually aggressive and endangered the block. 64. Jealousy makes people say crazy things. A woman complained to the HOA that her neighbor's new luxury car was too shiny. She claimed that when the sun hit the polished chrome, it created a laser beam that heated up her living room and faded her curtains. She actually wanted the board to force the neighbor to drive a dirtier car or cover it in a mat wrap to protect her upholstery. 65. A backyard astronomer set up a telescope to look at the moon and stars. The lady next door, however, was convinced he was peeping into her bedroom. She filed a police report for high-tech voyeurism. The cops checked the telescope and found it was glued in a fixed position pointing straight up at the sky, literally incapable of looking at her house. She still claimed he had curved lenses that could see around corners. 66. A woman filed a complaint because her neighbor's baby monitor was talking at her. She insisted the static crackles coming through the speaker were actually coded messages aimed at her bedroom window. She demanded the neighbor switch to non-telepathic childcare technology or soundproof their nursery. The officer checked the device and confirmed it was just white noise, but she remained convinced the baby was communicating threats. 67. A frantic man called animal control to report a wild beast swimming in his neighbor's pool. He claimed it was a dangerous, invasive species that looked like a small alligator. The beast turned out to be an iguana that had fallen in and was desperately trying to get out. Instead of helping the poor creature, he wanted the neighbor fined for harboring a swamp monster in a residential zone. 68. In a display of extreme pettiness, a neighbor sued over the direction of a security camera. The camera was pointed at the owner's own driveway, but the complainer said it could theoretically capture him if he danced naked in a specific corner of his yard. He argued that the potential for him to be embarrassed by his own hypothetical actions was grounds for removing the camera. Why were you planning to dance naked there in the first place? 69. And finally, the undisputed champion of absurdity. A woman filed a restraining order against her neighbor because she believed he was telepathically harassing her. She admitted he never spoke to her, never looked at her, and never made a sound. However, she claimed that he was thinking mean thoughts about her so loudly that she could hear them in her head. She wanted the court to legally mandate that he stop thinking about her. If that doesn't prove we are doomed, I don't know what does. And that's the end. 69 complaints proving that pettiness isn't a personality flaw, it's a competitive sport. Now a question that will expose your true nature. If you could file one complaint about a neighbor with absolute anonymity, what would you report? Not the polite answer, the real one. Drop it in the comments and let's see who's secretly chaotic. If even one of these stories made you question humanity, hit like and subscribe, because the next batch is going to be even more unhinged.